Everybody, welcome to another Watchful Eye Studio video. This time we are talking about the release of the World War III Warsaw Pact book, which covers 3 of the Warsaw Pact nations that were under basically the Soviet Union umbrella, that were probably the more impactful in this storyline. Those would be East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. And we're going to go over each of the lists in turn. But I think the first thing we need to start with is the special rules. And these cover pretty much all 3 nations in the Warsaw Pact book. Now, some of them are going to have these special rules with their vehicles, or, well, in this case it's mostly vehicles, or it'll be generic. So, and it'll mention under each entry, so you don't really have to necessarily worry about it too much. But this is the page that covers the generic rules, and there's a few that are consistent with the Soviets as well. The ERA armor and the radar. Those are consistent with the Soviet book. So if you're playing Soviets already, you'll be familiar with some of these rules. So let's start talking about the East Germans. And essentially, you're going to have a good, a decent, and a not so good statistics for each of these nations, and the Germans are going to be falling right in the middle as far as their statistics for morale and remounting vehicles and assaults and all those things that are going to keep your army in check. They're going to fall in the middle of that. So they have some pretty cool armor options as far as color schemes and stuff that you can work with. And of course, we'll go over that a little bit later in the book. But there's some really nice pictures and layouts in this book that cover all the nations. And the East Germans have some unique camouflage. Or you could always go with that kind of standard Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact green. So getting into the East German organization, the one thing that is really nice about the Warsaw Pact in general is if you play Soviets, there are a tremendous amount of vehicles and options that you can utilize and play these other nations. And especially if you maintain keeping to that Soviet green color. And if you don't necessarily put the East German or Polish or whatever decals on your vehicles, you could use them pretty much generically and try playing different lists. So I think that's one of the really unique and cool things about playing Warsaw Pact armies is the multifunction that you get out of the vehicles. I mean, a German, leopard is a German leopard, and realistically, there's only a few nations that fielded those, and same thing with the Americans, and there's very little crossover. In this case, you could buy a bunch of T-72s, and you got, 3-4 armies that you can play it with, not to mention the stuff in the Middle East. So I think that's really cool. So the East Germans have 5 main formations that they can field. The T-72B, which is going to be part of the new plastic kit with the reactive armor, which looks really cool. And then the T-72M, which has been kind of the existing miniature that's been around, but it'll be packaged in the same kit, giving you the option of fielding either T-72 variant. The T-55s and a a BMP Mordschützen battalion, so basically an armored infantry battalion, and then the BTR 60 battalion, so another a wheeled motorized battalion. And then of course they have all their different options that come available to them. And one of the things that I wanted to show just on the East German organization is all the things that I highlighted in yellow are also things that the Soviets can take. So you can see there is a tremendous amount of stuff that you could build, paint, and field, not only with the Soviets, but also the East Germans. And I didn't necessarily do this with the other Czech or Polish organizations, but they're very, very similar to the East German, and you can, and again, see all the different options that are available to you to play different forces. So when you're beginning and painting and collecting a new Warsaw Pact force, maybe take this in consideration and be able to maximize your purchases with different army lists and try them out. And of course, each list has their own unique items that are available to them, and there's a couple different options. And the T-72B, which I didn't highlight, the Soviets can actually take as well, and we'll see that a little bit later in the book. So moving on, let's take a look at some of the organizations of the formations. Now we're looking at the T-72B, and pretty standard layout. You can take T-72s, and then you have some nice support options available to you in reconnaissance, anti-tank, anti-air, artillery, and infantry support. And one of the things I wanted to show is how a T-72B, pretty much the same otherwise than as a T-72M, but the armor is better. So they're going to be a little bit more expensive points-wise. And here's the T-72M. And you can literally see the organization is almost identical. The only difference is right there, which I think is a really nice option, is the T-72Ms can also take T-55s, where the T-72Bs cannot. And that's really the only difference. So it just depends on if you own any T-55s and you want to throw them in the list. They are a nice, cheap option. And moving on to the T-55s, a very similar organization as the T-72s. Lots of tank options available to you here. One of the things they offer are the older T-55 variant, which is not a great tank for World War III, but they are ridiculously cheap. So maybe it's a hold the objective in the woods kind of, platoon or company as they call it. So there's that. And then you have the BMP battalion, which is the infantry, motorized infantry, and they can have BMP 1s or 2s available to them, and not the 3s, unfortunately. So BMP 1s and 2s. All right, and then you have the BTR 60 battalion, and this is just the wheeled version, and the options are very, very similar to the BMP 1s and 2 battalions. And these are the new items that are available to the East Germans. They have a rocket battery on a vehicle, mounted on a vehicle, and then they also have a new type of plane. And now the Soviets will get access to this Su-22 as well, but it's offered in this book. And some of the other slight differences that you'll see is, for example, the Hind helicopter squadrons. They can't take as many helicopters or as many infantry in those helicopters as the Soviets can. So there's a few slight differences that you might not be able to take as big of companies or platoons as the Soviets may. And obviously some of the statistics might be a little bit different, but for all intents and purposes, they're very, very similar. So now moving on to the Czechs, the Czechoslovakia. And this is going to be your not so good army. Their stats are the weakest out of the 3 Warsaw Pact nations. And they have kind of some neat camouflage options as well. And the Czech flag on the vehicles looks pretty cool. It's just a personal choice, but for all intents and purposes, if you want your mass amounts of troops, the Czechs are definitely gonna be the way to go. And you can see their organization is going to be very, very similar to the East Germans. They have these Dana self-propelled artillery batteries, these big guns. That's available to them. That's different than the East Germans or even the Soviets for that matter. And realistically, that's about it. Everything else is widely available throughout the Warsaw Pact, which I guess is maybe one of the advantages that they quote unquote had, is how universal everything was. So getting into the checklists, you have your T-72 battalion, very similar organization as the East Germans. And then you get into your T-72 Ms, and they again organized very similarly. So looking at the T-72 tank battalion, I highlighted a couple of the new items that were available to them versus the East German similar tank battalion. So the BMP-2 motor rifle company is something that the Czechs can take that, if I'm not mistaken, the East Germans could not. And then, of course, this Praga anti-aircraft platoon is something unique for the Czech forces. And again, the T-72 M tank battalion, very, very similar layout. They can take the T-55s, which is great. And then they have the 2 new items, the BMP-2 motor rifle company and the Praga. So just some differences there. And then they have the T-55 tank battalion. Very similar options as the East Germans did. And then they have the BMP motor rifle battalion. Again, they can take the BMP 1s or 2s. And very similar support options. And then they call it the wheeled motor rifle company, but it's the BTR 60s. Again, same layout. I mean, you see a consistency here where, if you're playing Soviets or Warsaw Pact, you're going to get used to, what you can take, what you can't. Obviously, the points may change depending on which nation you select, but at least the vehicles don't change all that much. And here are the new items that the Czechs can take. That 152 millimeter artillery battery, and then of course the Praga anti-air is the other option. Now we move into the Polish, and this is going to be your most elite out of the Warsaw Pact. They have probably the best stat line out of all 3. And then getting into the force organization, again, very similar to the East Germans and the Czechs. What you'll find is that the Polish actually share a lot of similarities with the Czech lists. Their stats are obviously different, but very similar platoon options. For example, they can take the Dana 152 millimeter artillery battery as well. So just you know, show some similarities there. They have the T-72B tank battalion. You see the consistencies here, and then the T-72 tank battalion as well, and then the T-55s and the wheeled motor rifle battalion, which is the BTR-60s, and then of course the BMP motor rifle battalion, allowing you to take your BMP-1s and your BMP-2s. Now, one of the things I did like about the Warsaw Pact book is showing you all the different kind of paint schemes that could be available to you. I mean, you could do that kind of standard green, but I really do like this East German camouflage scheme. If I did ever decide to strictly play East Germans, I probably would do that. For now, I'm just sticking to my my Soviet green colors, so I can kind of field it for whatever I want, essentially. And then again, they have some paint scheme options for the Czechs and the Polish, and you can see the Hinds, for example, are very similar in colors. The lighter color on the Polish Hind, a little bit more towards the white palette, whereas the Czech one is more yellow. But again, if you do some Google searching, you'll see there's all different paint schemes available. Same thing with the tank camouflage, and then of course the cross on the Polish tanks, something that could be either very easily added with an airbrush or purposely left off, which would make them look very Soviet in nature. Then the other thing that I really kind of dig about this book is it updates the Soviet items as well. So with the addition of some new kits, particularly the T-72s, it lays out how you could actually field these in Soviet armies now. Of course, gives you the points, which I just removed for sanity's sake, and gives you the stats and everything that you need to be able to play those. The book also has 2 unique scenarios that you can play, which is very cool, and gives you kind of a TO and E for that. And and then of course at the back of the book, just like with most books, you have your catalog. And one of the things I found interesting about this upcoming release for Warsaw Pact is they actually had or have a infantry force, which I thought was really cool. I think this is kind of the first time in World War III history that I can recollect where actually the focus was on infantry. I mean, yes, there are tanks in the kit and planes and things of that nature, but it is a BMP motor rifle battalion that you can, again, field for any of the nations. I just thought that was really, really cool, and something that I wanted to at least point out that, there's more of a focus on infantry in this case. And that, folks, is pretty much the book. It has your all your plastic kits. There are a few typos in the book that I did find. So like if it might tell you to go, hey, unit entry for the Praga AA platoons on page 42, but it's actually on page 50. So there's a few typos like that, but nothing to stress out about. I mean, heck, when you're putting together these books, all that can be challenging until the final layout, and sometimes you just forget to go back in and change those things. So I get it. Great layout of book. There are some new infantry options as well. The East Germans are going to be getting some of their own infantry. Obviously, you can feel the Soviet infantry as pretty much infantry for all the nations, but the East Germans did have a unique helmet to them. So, you know, again, you can pick those up if you're going to specifically do East Germans. And that's it. I mean, the book, like I said, is laid out well. It's a good addition to the World War III range, and it gets me excited about working on my force. And I did about a 60 point, something like that, force in about 12 hours, which, you know, if you want to check out the video, I'll put a link in it in the description down below. And I continue to work on the list to try to get up to 100 points. So, yeah, I got some more stuff that I'm going to be adding to it, and I'll do an update video for that at some point. But I hope you enjoyed this video describing the new Warsaw Pact book and everything that it has to offer. And for existing players, there's probably nothing incredibly new in this book, but definitely worth picking up to have in your collection and to build out those communist armies in your World War III games. So, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave your comments down below, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.